Fantasy football is back, and I could not be happier to say that sentence. We are going to be drafting teams every single night on the live stream. I hope you draft them with us, and just in case you do, I need to prep you with some running back rankings. That way you're ready. But tier one, we are going to be led off with Saquon Barkley. There's nothing really to discuss. Yes, the offensive coordinator changes, but in reality, they're bringing the whole gang back. This is the running back that had 355 points last season through only 16 games. If you're going back and looking at what we said at the end of last year, if you remove the Jalen Hurts 1-yard rushing touchdowns, I actually think Saquon Barkley's 2024 season would have gone down as the best running back season in NFL history. The man had over 2,000 rushing yards in 16 games. Obviously, he has the involvement as a receiver as well. Now, of course, Jalen Hurts doesn't have the same checkdown rate as opposed to what Saquon Barkley had in New York, but frankly, it doesn't matter where you are actually getting the rushing touchdowns. What's funny is Barkley only had 17 carries inside the 5-yard line, mainly because Jalen Hurts steals those, but he still had 13 total rushing touchdowns. And if you're looking at what he was able to do as a receiver as well, obviously he was able to add to that total touchdown category. Barkley is my running back one. If you are scared of injuries, my only thing is I don't know how you can possibly predict those, even if Barkley dealt with injuries earlier in his NFL career. I think he's the 101 this year, not remotely close. The age, maybe a little bit of a concern, which is why he's in the same tier as Bijan and Gibbs. If we look at age 27 running backs through NFL history that comped similarly to Barkley, you had Sean Alexander, Derrick Henry, Adrian Peterson, Larry Johnson, T. Barber, CMC. And if you're looking at the following season, you do have 23, 24 points per game in the range of outcomes for Barkley. Now, going over to Bijan Robinson, the massive story that I think went under the radar with Bijan from year one to year two is the involvement at the goal line. You go back to Bijan's rookie season. If you look at this, a screenshot from flockfantasy.com, you will see that Bijan only had 3 carries inside the 5-yard line. That number actually jumped up to 15 in his second season. This led to Bijan scoring about 100 additional fantasy points. This led Bijan to actually having 6 separate weeks where he finished as a top 5 running back. A lot of that coming in the second half of the season. If you remember, Bijan actually opened up the schedule with a brutal stretch of games, including going up against the Steelers, the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Saints, the Bucks, and then it opened up and he turned into that legitimate league winner. If you're looking at the usage rates, he actually played more snaps as well, going from 69% of the snaps up to 76% of the snaps. You have a little bit of a wider range of outcomes in terms of the quarterback play here with Michael Penix, where we have a really good idea of what to expect with Jalen Hurts. We have a really good idea what to expect with Jared Goff. And for that reason, if you wanted to take Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of Bijan Robinson, I'm not going to fault you one way or another. Heading over to Jahmyr Gibbs, he also played 17 games this past year, and Jahmyr Gibbs, from a total fantasy points perspective, actually was the true RB1 in full PPR formats. And what's going to be interesting to note here is if you were looking at the amount of touches that he also received at the goal line, you would have thought that maybe David Montgomery had a significant goal line role, but you actually did have 17 carries inside the 5-yard line for Jahmyr Gibbs this past season. Back-to-back years with 52 receptions. You did see the target share come down just slightly from year one to year two. It's not like Gibbs is having absolutely everything as a receiver. Montgomery is still being used somewhat in that fashion, but I'm going to expect Jahmyr Gibbs, the 23-year-old running back, to continue to take more and more snaps away from David Montgomery, as we'll talk about Montgomery later in this video, where you can actually see his snap rate decreasing. Now, going over to tier 2, this is where things are going to get a little bit tougher, of course, because we can go back and we can look at what we have with the tier 1 running backs and we can say, well, we know exactly what to expect. We know that worst case scenario, these are going to be guys that are low end running back ones. When we go over to the tier 2 RBs, Ashton Genty, we've never seen take an NFL snap. Now, that is not going to stop me from ranking him extremely aggressively. If you head over to the prospects page on flockfantasy.com, you will see that every top 10 drafted running back since the year 2016 has put out multiple running back 1 finishes, with these guys including Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, that have legitimately broken fantasy football. You look at the volume numbers that Ashton Genty had in college, you look at his size, and you combine this with his receiving skill set. I know you have heard over and over and over again all offseason how many tackles this guy broke, how many yards after contact he had. But one fact that I think a lot of people overlook is that he led all of college football running backs with receiving yards in 2023. So he's not only a workhorse in the truest degree, but at the same time, he does have the receiving skill set that could see 60, 70, 80 targets this season. So I think Genty is an extremely high floor player where he is just going to get all the volume immediately in Las Vegas. I will have him in the same tier as CMC, however, and the reason for this is Achan, Genty and the Raiders, we can't expect it to be a great offense. We know the Eagles will be a great offense. We know the Falcons should probably be respectable, and we know the Lions are going to be a good offense as well. We can probably say the same thing about the Niners, at least that's how they project. Genty shouldn't have a ton of trips to the red zone in comparison. And with CMC, super wide range of outcomes. We go back 2 years ago, and for the Niners in 2023, the man dropped 391 points. This was, I want to say, 40 more points than what we had with Saquon Barkley in 2024. So the ceiling with CMC, especially in full PPR formats, is higher than what we've ever seen with Saquon Barkley. But again, we've kind of seen this throughout Christian McCaffrey's entire NFL career at this point, where you go back to 2020, dealt with injuries, he was the RB33. You go back to 2021, dealt with injuries, he was the RB28. Now in 2024, he is the RB67. However, every single time McCaffrey's been able to stay healthy from 2018 onwards, he was either the running back 2 or the running back 1 overall in fantasy. If we assume that the Niners are healthier overall this season and they are able to get back to a 10-win team, which is kind of what Las Vegas sportsbooks are telling us at the moment, Christian McCaffrey could still very easily be the running back 1 overall. Clearly, he has a little bit of a lower floor here than what you're going to see with some of these other guys. I will note that if you are looking at the best age 29 seasons that we've ever seen, at least since the year 2000, you have guys like Priest Holmes, Tiki Barber, Matt Forte, Marshall Faulk, all scoring over 20 fantasy points per game. But out of these top 15 or so finishers, what you actually find is none of the running backs dealt with significant injuries at age 28. So we have yet to see one of the top fantasy options at age 29 be able to be an injury bounce back candidate. So CMC would be the first guy to do so at this age. And again, we're going to be drafting on Underdog Fantasy. You know, we got to rep Underdog everywhere we go. And that's where we're going to be drafting every single night. Best Ball Mania is a tournament with a $25 buy-in and $2 million to first place. So McCaffrey's the kind of guy that if you want to have access to that $2 million first place prize, you kind of need to hit that ceiling where you are getting the 390 fantasy point finish. So I still think you shouldn't cross him off your board, specifically in that kind of format. But of course, if you want to get in on drafts very early with us, where we are going to be drafting every single day, it's Underdog Fantasy. We've been there for years. I know you've probably been there for years as well. Just in case you haven't, I'll leave a link in the description. I'll leave a link in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK will actually get you a deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, it will get you our 2025 draft guide cheat sheet. And on top of that, you are going to be able to get into drafts with us every single night. And you know we'll be hosting those Flock tournaments this season as well. But let's move over to our next running back, and we're going to be looking at Devon Achan. Now, initially, I didn't want to put Achan in the same tier as what we have with the Christian McCaffrey. I don't want to put him in the same tier as what we had with Genty. And in reality, if we had more space on this tier list, I'd maybe make a little tier for him by himself. But I definitely think you should be ahead of the tier below him with like the Derrick Henrys, Chase Browns of the world. And if you look at Achan, I mean, we can go back and just look at his game log from flockfantasy.com. You'll see that there are some absolutely disgusting weeks. Y'all remember after the Buffalo game in week 2 and we had the Tua injury, I was like, oh, he's going to be garbage with no Tua. This offense is going to be disgusting. I don't want him on my roster. And he proceeded to go RB33, RB44, RB53, RB25. Then Tua came back and, well, what do you know? He's the top 5 running back in fantasy again. I mean, if we're looking at finishes as the RB6 or higher this past year, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He has the spike weeks. He managed to finish the RB5 in total fantasy points. But if you look at the splits with and without Tua, he averaged 22.5 points per game in games that Tua played. He averaged only 8.5 fantasy points per game with no Tua in that 6-game sample. He's a young running back. You have the receiving skill set. You have the big playability. Again, he also saw that massive jump of carries inside the 5-yard line from 5 to actually 15 from year 1 to year 2. He actually saw a massive jump with his receiving usage as well, where he only ran 145 routes in his first season, and he actually ran 302 routes in his second year. So yeah, I think Achan is somebody that you kind of have to be on given the development that he's had as a receiver and what we've seen now over a larger sample. Now going over to Derrick Henry, y'all know my take that I had last year, which turned out to age like absolute milk, was I thought it was a good idea to rank Josh Jacobs over Derrick Henry. Embarrassing, and we all remember it, and if you don't remember it, I'm going to remind you of it because I can't live that one down. Derrick Henry comes out, and Derrick Henry drops 336 fantasy points. He finishes as the RB4. This was a running back that was going in round 2 of redraft leagues, and this was a running back going in round 3 of underdog drafts. He was an absolute smash pick. And now if you're looking at over the past about 8 seasons or 7 years since 2018, Derrick Henry has actually finished as a top 10 running back every season but 2021. This is the picture perfect consistency. He goes over to Baltimore, and who would have thought the man ends up seeing 1,900 rushing yards. The receiving usage isn't there. He only runs 60 routes. But frankly, it doesn't matter. If you're going to get 20 carries inside the 5-yard line and you are going to have this type of touchdown upside, 16 touchdowns this past year. Now, I know we said it last year, and I know people are going to roll their eyes because I said it last year and was horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. But age at some point is going to matter. He is going to be 31 years old this next season. He turns 32 next January. If you look at the top 10 age 31 seasons over the past 25 years, think of all the great running backs we've had over the past 25 years. We've had Hall of Famers. We've seen Adrian Peterson. The best guys were Curtis Martin. Curtis Martin dropped 20 fantasy points per game. You had Ricky Watters. This was 25 years ago, average 18.8 fantasy points per game. Tiki Barber, about 20 years ago, averaged 18.8. Raheem Mostert, a couple of years back, averaged 18. Corey Dillon, 17.5. James Stewart, 15.5. Thomas Jones, 15. But nonetheless, I mean, if he puts out a top 5-ish season from a 31-year-old running back over the past 25 years, score about 15, 16 fantasy points per game. I do think if you look at the large sample, even the Hall of Fame running backs do regress from 30 to 31. Derrick Henry has showed no signs of slowing down. So again, I'm going to give him his credit. I'm going to rank him as a top 10 RB, but I do think that it's justified to maybe not have him as the RB4, which is where he finished last season. Now, Chase Brown has to be one of the biggest winners of the NFL draft, right? Where if you go through and if you look at all the running backs that the Cincinnati Bengals had visits with, there was a real chance Cincinnati actually drafted somebody like Caleb Johnson, but they don't. And now it is Chase Brown's backfield this next season. And if you look at since they took Zach Moss out of this offense and it was just Chase Brown's season from weeks 9 through 17, his snap rate per week was 80%, 87%, 83%, 81%, 86%, 91%, 98%. Dude played 98% of the snaps in week 16 and week 17, 84%. So we can look at the season-long numbers and say, oh, he played 65% of the snaps in year 2. But no, this was very much just split right down the middle. You can see it with the heat map on flockfantasy.com. And then if you go ahead and if you look at his target share, I mean, he's getting up to 20% of the team's targets some weeks. Some weeks he's running 20 routes. He has the receiving skill set that you're looking for. He's playing the snaps. He's in a great offense. He finishes the RB10 despite only being the starting running back in Cincinnati for the second half of the season this past year. He had 54 receptions, again, despite not really seeing that receiving usage until the second half of the season. And now you don't really have any competition going into 2025 for this starting job. So to be completely honest with you, I want to rank Chase Brown over Derrick Henry. It would be very, very tough in the comment section. So I'm going to let y'all bully me into putting Chase Brown at 8 and not putting Chase Brown at 7. But if you go ahead and if you look at running backs that had a similar age 24 season to Chase Brown, you're looking at names like DeMarco Murray, James Cook, Marion Barber, Lamar Miller, Ramondre Stevenson, David Montgomery, Travis Etienne. A lot of these guys did show RB1 upside that following year. Now let's go ahead and let's look at Bucky Irving. Now Bucky Irving may take this same year 2 jump, right? Because you go back and you look at Bucky Irving's rookie season in comparison to Chase Brown, Bucky Irving's rookie season was 10x better. But what we have yet to see from Bucky is we've yet to see him get to that 80% snap rate that we are consistently getting from Brown. And you still have Rachaad White. Now, of course, you can tell by these rankings, I have Bucky Irving RB10. Rachaad White's going to be at the very bottom of this list. Bucky Irving is the starting running back. Bucky Irving is going to have the majority of the work. But I'm maybe a little bit concerned, just given the frame, that he doesn't end up seeing 80+% of the snaps ever. Like, you go back and look at this past season. You had 1 week from Bucky Irving where he played more than 70% of the snaps. You had 0 weeks where he played 80+% of the snaps. Now, super efficient. His juke rate was up at 30%, much more efficient than Rachaad White from a per touch perspective. If you're going through and looking at what he was able to do as a receiver as well, he had 52 targets. I mean, he had almost 400 receiving yards and only 1,100 rushing yards. He was really utilized as a receiver in year one. And typically the trend for these players that show that efficiency on a rookie season is in their second year, they are going to get the bump with volume, which should also bring fantasy points with them. This should be a really good offense. They go ahead and they take one of my favorite wide receivers in the draft in round one. If you wanted to rank Bucky ahead of Chase Brown, not going to fault you for it. Our next guy is going to be Jonathan Taylor. With Taylor, we've seen a ceiling that maybe we haven't had from some of the other guys in this range, like Chase Brown and Bucky Irving. Because you go back to 2020, Jonathan Taylor was the RB6. You go back to 2021, Jonathan Taylor was the number one running back overall with 374 fantasy points. And this was actually more than Saquon Barkley this past season. That's the type of ceiling that we saw from Jonathan Taylor. Now, at the same time, since then, we really haven't seen Taylor be able to go out there and put up that 300 plus fantasy point season. We have seen Taylor deal with injuries throughout his entire NFL career, where he's only played one season with 16 or more games. Over the playoff stretch, Taylor came through in a very strong way, where he finishes the year with that week 16 game against the Tennessee Titans, where he has over 200 rushing yards. He also had 27 fantasy points against the New York Giants in the fantasy football finals. So I think a lot of people have that positive taste in their mouth from Jonathan Taylor at the end of this past season. But again, this is going to be a little bit of an older running back. This is going to be an offense that I think you do need to be concerned about quarterback play with the combination of Anthony Richardson as well as Daniel Jones. So if I'm looking at the quarterback play for JT versus the quarterback play from the other running backs in this same tier, if we're looking at the injury history for Jonathan Taylor as opposed to some of the other running backs in the same tier, I think that's why I'm going to have Jonathan Taylor down at 10. Now, going over and looking at Kairen Williams. Kairen Williams also a big-time winner from the NFL draft. I mean, obviously, we saw this coaching staff go out there and take Blake Corum in the third round last year. So the concern was, maybe they don't like Corum. Maybe they have to go through and they take Caleb Johnson in round 3 this year with Kairen Williams coming to the end of his rookie deal. He doesn't really have the team investment. Yada, yada, yada. None of that comes to fruition. Kairen Williams is yet again a bell cow running back going into this next season. And if you look at what he managed to do this past year, he had 88% of the snaps in Los Angeles. 88% of the snaps. And this was just consistent through the entire season as well. If you look at the screenshot from the site, I mean, so many weeks of you're looking at 90+% of his offensive usage. Now, you may not necessarily have the same spike weeks that we had from some of these other names like Jonathan Taylor, like Kairen Williams never gave you that 40-point performance. I mean, if we're looking at top 5 finishes, he only had one of them. So maybe Kairen is a little more of that consistent producer that you'd be excited about in your regular redraft league, like the Flock League. I'm definitely going to be looking at Kairen. Whereas in underdog drafts, if you're looking for those massive spike weeks, maybe Breece Hall gives you a little bit of a higher week-to-week ceiling given his big playability. With Breece, he did take that step backwards from his second year into year 3, falling from running back 2, where, remember, I actually loved Breece Hall in year 1. I thought the Jets offense was going to be better in 2024 with Rodgers than it was with Zach Wilson. I'm sorry I was wrong on that front. But what's hilarious is Breece has actually continued to increase his role in this offense every single year. However, you did get that significant step back with the fantasy points this past year. He's gone from 49% of the snaps up to 61% of the snaps, up to 72% of the snaps. The receiving involvement is what took a massive hit from 2023 to 2024, however. This fell from 95 targets down to 76. And what I'm going to be concerned about is I'm concerned that you actually may continue to see this receiving involvement decline because you're having Justin Fields come in And with Fields, I'm not expecting the New York Jets to be much worse than they were this past year. Obviously, the Jets were a complete debacle. They earned pick number 7 in the draft for a reason. But we're typically not expecting those rush first quarterbacks to have a super high check down rate. You can go over to Baltimore, right? We can look at Derrick Henry and say, oh, he didn't catch any footballs. And it didn't matter because it's an elite offense and they had a ton of trips to the red zone. And Derrick Henry was able to cash in on a ridiculous amount of rushing touchdowns. But if Justin Fields isn't going to have that check down rate for Breece Hall, and we don't expect the Jets offense to be the same offense that what you have in Baltimore, if you don't have those rushing touchdowns for Breece, I think things are going to get a little bit ugly. I know a lot of people are expecting Breece to possibly get traded in the NFL draft. There has been some smoke with that. But I mean, even when the Jets have been okay, Breece has still never had a season with more than 10 carries inside the 5-yard line. Like you go back to 2023 when he was the running back 2 in fantasy, according to flockfantasy.com, he had 1 carry inside the 5-yard line. Now, let's move this over to Josh Jacobs. Now, this is the guy that I thought it would have been a good idea to take over Derrick Henry, which again, I'll admit was laughable. I mean, he did finish as the RB6. So Josh Jacobs was great last season. The issue that I'm going to have is if you are looking at the total workload that Jacobs has had at this point, dating back to 2019, you have 242, 273, 217, a 340, 233, 301. You do have a massive amount of touches on this body. And if we're looking at the receiving involvement, you did have the receiving yardage totals go up this past season compared to what it was in Las Vegas. But you actually had him fall from 54 targets with only 13 games with the Raiders in 2023 down to 43 targets with the Green Bay Packers in 17 games in 2024. So the receiving involvement did take a massive step backwards in Green Bay. What saved him, of course, is 15 rushing touchdowns. But if we actually see some of these rushing touchdowns regress backwards and we end up getting Jacobs a regular season around 8 or 9, maybe the Packers actually decide to throw the ball a little bit more inside the 5-yard line, where Josh Jacobs had 22 attempts inside the 5-yard line this past season. If the rushing touchdowns aren't there, I think you could see that scale back. You do have the massive workload on the frame, and y'all know that is something that maybe concerns me just a little bit too much. I'm going ahead and looking at James Cook. James Cook is a running back that saw a massive step forward, again, with the carries inside the 5-yard line. I hate to go back to this, but the 2 things that matter most for running backs in fantasy are going to be the touches inside the 5-yard line, as well as the receiving involvement. Those are the high value opportunities for the running back position. You had James Cook go from 5 carries inside the 5-yard line as a year 2 player up to 15 carries inside the 5-yard line in year 3. This outweighed him falling from 55% of the snaps down to 49%. He was actually on the field a little bit less, but frankly, it didn't matter because they gave him the goal line role this past year. The receiving involvement fell as well. He fell from 54 targets down to 38. He fell from 445 receiving yards down to 258. Now, my concern with this is what happens similar to Josh Jacobs if we expect that maybe just slightly the goal line role goes elsewhere. Josh Allen takes more of those rushing touchdowns. It looks a little more similar to what you had in 2023. And instead of expecting James Cook to be a mid running back 1 in that scenario, I think you're more so expecting high-end RB2, low-end RB1. Now, I wish the Los Angeles Chargers never signed Najee Harris, so I could come out here and I could say, oh, Amari Hampton, he's my running back 9. I wish I could rank Hampton as a top 10 running back day 1. He's my running back 5 if you check out the Dynasty rankings on the site. But if we're specifically looking for 2025, we have to at least acknowledge the fact that Najee is going to be there. Najee did get paid, I want to say close to $10 million on that 1-year deal. And Najee Harris has never missed a game of football in his NFL career. I don't know if he's ever missed a game of football in his collegiate career either. Najee Harris plays every single freaking game. Now, the positives with Hampton is if you go over and you look at the prospects page on flockfantasy.com, you will see that there are very few running backs that comp to Hampton, and the only bust that you could possibly draw is Javonte. The volume has been insane throughout his collegiate career. You're looking at 12 games played this final season at North Carolina and 319 total touches in those 12 games. you're looking at 2,000 yards from scrimmage in 12 games. If you're looking at his receiving involvement, he was second in his team in receptions, and that's playing a fewer game than the leading receiver. So if you're looking at receptions per game, Hampton was the number one guy in his offense. So I think Hampton should have the receiving role in Los Angeles very early on. I just think if you're drafting him, I don't know if you can start him with confidence early in the season. And I would almost expect this to be a Bucky Irving, Rachaad White type scenario from last year, where Hampton, round one drafted running back. I think he's a better running back than Bucky Irving, if we're going to be honest. I think that he's a better prospect than Bucky Irving. The only comp I'm really saying is similar to how Rachaad White kind of blocked a Bucky a little bit from hitting your lineup early in the year. I think the same thing could happen with Najee and Hampton. But still, a crazy running back upside. Could be a top 5 running back in the second half of the season. Now let's move over to a bigger tier and let's kind of go a little bit faster for these guys. Kenneth Walker is looking at a season where he had 64% of the snaps in Seattle, which was a career high, yet another year where he dealt with injuries. The receiving involvement rose. However, he only managed to finish as the RB27. If you're looking at the quarterback play now with Darnold, the fact that they lose both Lockett and Metcalf, I would actually expect that this is maybe a slightly worse offense. And Charbonnet has just continued to operate in a committee here as well. I'm going ahead and looking at Joe Mixon. Mixon's going to be 29 this next year. The receiving involvement stayed very similar from Cincinnati to Houston. Obviously, Mixon did deal with an injury early in the season. He did hit 1,000 rushing yards, but this is a team that's lost a significant amount of value with the offensive line. And you did see him actually fall to 63% of the snaps, which is the lowest mark that we have seen pretty much through Mixon's entire career, dating back to his rookie season. Now, going ahead and looking at Trevion Henderson, I think Henderson could potentially be rookie season Alvin Kamara. Because if you're looking at this offense in New England, it should be a much improved offense given the coaching staff and Drake May going into year 2. And the receivers, I guess we'll talk about Kyle Williams in the wide receiver rankings video. We'll talk about Stephon Diggs in that video as well. But neither wide receivers penciled in to see 25+% of this team's targets. I mean, this is a team that is very limited on weapons in the receiving game. Trevion Henderson obviously operated as a receiving back very early on at Ohio State. The man had 27 receptions as a true freshman. And if we go over to the prospects page on flockfantasy.com and we look at running backs that were selected between picks 30 and 50 that had a RAS score over 8 and had over 25% of their touches leading to first downs, you're looking at Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Javonte, Brees, Trevion, Nick Chubb, Kenneth Walker, Derrick Henry, Judkins, and Sony Michel. Now, looking at Chuba Hubbard, I know they take Trevor Etienne in round 4. I think the Etienne pick is more about shoring up the backup running back position. I think that really negatively impacts Rico Dowdle, not necessarily Hubbard himself. Hubbard, I was expecting to not be an impact player in the fantasy football playoffs the way that he was, just because Jonathan Brooks was constantly on the back burner. But the second Brooks comes in way later in the season than we were expecting, re-tears the ACL. So Jonathan Brooks is just absolutely done at this point. And Chuba Hubbard actually finishes as the RB15, as a high-end RB2 in fantasy this past year. I mean, at a decently young age, too. He's only going to be 26 years old this next season. And if you're looking at running backs that had a similar age 25 year to Chuba Hubbard since the year 2000, you had Ronnie Brown, Joe Mixon, Marshawn Lynch, Mark Ingram, Brandon Jacobs, Chris Carson, Saquon Barkley, Lamar Miller. And you have a really nice range of outcomes where on the low end at 26, these guys are averaging 12 fantasy points per game. And on the high end, they're up at 24. And I think that you actually could see Carolina improve with McMillan this next year stretching defenses. I'm going over to Alvin Kamara. I think the Saints are garbage. Alvin Kamara is going to be a 30-year-old running back. Alvin Kamara has not played 17 games of football over the past 5 seasons. So, I don't know. I mean, if you're looking at the touchdowns, they're not going to be there the way they were early in his career. You go back to 2018, the man had 14 rushing touchdowns. You go back to 2020, he had 16 rushing touchdowns. Over the past 4 seasons, you're looking at 4, 2, 5, 6. The reason is this offense is horrible. Added on concern that I'm going to have is, again, with how bad this team's going to be, what incentive does Alvin Kamara have to play at the end of the year? We saw in 2024, Kamara missed the fantasy football playoffs because, again, what are you playing for if you were the New Orleans Saints? If we're looking at Kamara's age 29 season and how that comps historically, guys like Marshall Faulk, Matt Forte, LT, Amon Green, Brian Westbrook, LaShawn McCoy, Michael Pittman, Alvin Kamara, James Conner. So obviously, great running back names, but the expected range of outcomes for these guys next season at 30, just because historically, unless your name's Derrick Henry, if you're a running back, you are going to get worse at age 30 anyway, is like 10 to 12 points. Now, Quinshon Judkins will be our next back. Judkins, in my opinion, great prospect. He has the size. I mean, the man had almost 1,600 rushing yards as a true freshman at Ole Miss. He had a RAS score over 9. Over 25% of his career touches led to first downs. And if you look at those type of running backs that were selected between picks 30 and 50, the list is Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Breece Hall, Nick Chubb, Kenneth Walker, Quinshon Judkins. Yes, they go ahead, they take Dylan Sampson. I don't think Judkins is going to have the same type of receiving involvement that you're going to get with the Travion Henderson, which is why I prefer Henderson. Also, Henderson is going to be in the better offense as well. And like I said, Dylan Sampson may turn this into a little bit more of a running back by committee where Sampson may have something in the receiving game. Going ahead and looking at David Montgomery. With Montgomery, you have seen him fall 4 straight seasons with his snap rate. When he was at Chicago, it was up at 75%. Then it fell down to 65% his final year at Chicago. His first year in Detroit, down at 48%. And this past season at 42%. Now, he's still found the production, mainly because over the past 2 years, he's had 36 carries with only 28 games played inside the 5-yard line. So if you have 25 touchdowns through those, 28 games, yeah, David Montgomery is going to be an effective running back in fantasy. But as we've seen Jahmyr Gibbs get more goal line involvement, and as we've seen Jahmyr Gibbs take more snaps from David Montgomery, I would be afraid that this is going to be a continued trend as David Montgomery is now 28 years old and Jahmyr Gibbs has been the more efficient back. Now, going over looking at James Conner. James Conner, took him in the flock league, thought he was going to give me 1 to 2 solid weeks at the beginning of the year, but the man went on a tear in the fantasy playoffs as well, where he comes through 22, 30, 26 fantasy points to end the year. And James Conner cashes in on his first running back 1 season since his first year in Arizona back in 2021. Obviously, they have Trey Benson, but they don't really invest in anything else at the running back position this offseason. So they are just running it back with Conner and Benson. James Conner's going to be 30, though. Again, I know that we said the same thing about Derrick Henry last year, and Derrick Henry gave us the middle finger. It turned out to be one of the league-winning running backs that you needed. But if you look at the historical data, the running backs that comp similarly to James Conner at 29 years old, you have somebody like LaShawn McCoy, you have somebody like Michael Pittman, and again, the following year, like LaShawn McCoy at 30, averages 9.1 fantasy points per game. That's another running back that's great. Now, let's go ahead and let's look at RJ Harvey. With RJ Harvey, I want to come through and I want to say, okay, well, this is all of a sudden the best landing spot you could have had in the NFL draft. You get the round 2 draft capital. I'm all in. I do have a little hesitation. He wasn't a super prolific pass catcher at UCF, especially with how old he is. He's like a 24-year-old rookie, right? At this point, you're expecting to just have absolute dominance, which he definitely did as a rusher. I mean, if you're going to go through and look at what he was in his collegiate offense, he had 25 total touchdowns. The next best player had 4. And if you're looking at his historical comps, picks 40 through 80 in the NFL draft, RAS score over 8, and he is super efficient back. Over 30% of his career touches led to first downs. You have Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, which I don't necessarily know if those comps are super applicable, to be honest. I think you're more so looking at like the Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, J.K. Dobbins, RJ Harvey, and James Cook type of range. Now, Caleb Johnson will be our next player. I think Caleb Johnson, good prospect. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the man had a whopping 23 total touchdowns. And if we look at the next highest running back or receiver on this team, they were at 3 at Iowa. I mean, he had every market share number you could possibly have. He has the size. We're through 12 games played. I mean, the man had a total of 262 touches. He gets decent draft capital, go and pick 83 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, this team that wants to run the ball. My thing is, I think Jalen Warren's still going to be the receiving back. Not only do I think Jalen Warren's still going to be the receiving back, if Mason Rudolph is truly the starting quarterback here, expectation should be it is arguably the worst quarterback player you're going to have in the NFL and probably a bottom 10 offense. So if Caleb Johnson, like his access to high value touches is the goal line role in a bad offense, it's not necessarily the running back I'm wanting. Now, going ahead and looking at Isaiah Pacheco, I honestly may want to move Swift ahead of him because, again, you go back 2 years ago with Pacheco. He's the RB15 in fantasy with only 14 games played, 213 fantasy points in 2023. I don't necessarily know if we can look at 2024 just because, I mean, I don't know how healthy he was. I would get it at the end of the year. I thought that Pacheco was going to be able to come back in specifically for the real life playoffs. I thought you would have seen a lot of Pacheco in like the AFC Championship. I thought we were going to be done with Kareem Hunt by the time we got to the Super Bowl, but Hunt never went away. And essentially every mark you could possibly see for Pacheco fell dramatically. The main concern that I would have is if you're looking at his juke rate on flockfantasy.com, that fell from 15% through the first 2 years of his career and almost got cut in half down to 8%. An 8% juke rate is laughably bad. So from a per touch perspective, he really wasn't doing much with the ball whatsoever. So he may have lost juice, which is why I actually may be moving DeAndre Swift ahead of him. What's crazy is with how bad Swift has been, or with how the perception of Swift has been, it's hilarious to know that every season of his NFL career, he's been at worst the running back 20 in fantasy. Everybody and their mom, including myself, and probably including the Bears front office, thought they were replacing DeAndre Swift with the running back in the draft. Frankly, it didn't happen. DeAndre Swift is still the guy. DeAndre Swift is still the starter. If you look at what he had this past year in Chicago, he had 67% of the snaps. This ties his highest career mark back in 2021 with the Detroit Lions. He finishes as the RB19. He plays all 17 games. He had 52 targets, and all of a sudden we're expecting this to be a much improved offense with Ben Johnson as well as Caleb Williams going into year 2. So in this range, I think I'm maybe going to be in on Swift. I'm going ahead and looking at Aaron Jones. Again, I know that Aaron Jones was a massive value for where he went in drafts last year. So if we said this last year, would have been dead wrong. But the age is something we have to think about. Aaron Jones played his age 30 season last year. He's going to be age 31. We go ahead and we look at running backs at a similar age 30 season to Aaron Jones. The list is Curtis Martin, Garrison Hurst, Matt Forte, Warwick Dunn, Antoine Smith, Mark Ingram, Adrian Peterson. And yes, Mark Ingram was a great running back just like Aaron Jones. Adrian Peterson was a great running back just like Aaron Jones. For those young kids out there, I got to let you know, Adrian Peterson was better than Aaron Jones. Okay, let's just put that out there. Matt Forte was a pretty damn good running back just like Aaron Jones, right? I'm not giving you a list of bumps. I'm giving you the list of some of the best age 30 running back seasons we've seen over the past 25 years. The expected range of outcomes like about 11 fantasy points per game the following year. They give Jordan Mason a decent little contract here, so I don't know if Aaron Jones is 3-down Belka. I don't really know what to expect with McCarthy either, and he's a 31-year-old running back. Now let's get to some other running backs that we could have guaranteed were going to be replaced. Brian Robinson, I thought this dude was done skis. Brian Robinson, you saw the juke rate fall to 18% this past year. The juke rate's actually fallen from 28% down to 21%, down to 18% through the first 3 years of his NFL career. The snaps have gone up from 42% to 52% to 55%. So he plays a career high in snaps this past season, but still only finishes the RB29. Difficulty is he just has absolutely no receiving role whatsoever, right? So just the upside's severely capped. Tony Pollard looks like he's going to be in a much better offense. And at the same time, he does have a decent little role here where they don't really bring anybody in. Tony Pollard, not super old, going to be 28 this next season. He did play 69% of the snaps for the Tennessee Titans this past year. Big issue is he only had 5 carries inside the 5-yard line, but the Tennessee Titans ended the season with the number 1 pick overall. So I don't necessarily know if this is because they decided to give Tajay Spears all the work at the goal line. That wasn't the case. The case is they just didn't get inside the red zone. They didn't have many touchdown opportunities. So if you expect that Ward's going to significantly improve this offense, I think Tony Pollard could have a little bit of juice. Charbonnet is like, if y'all remember way back in the day, like Devonta Freeman, Tevin Coleman, Charbonnet is that same mold, right? Where if you're desperate, you can go through and you can start Charbonnet if you really need to. But the main reason you'd want Charbonnet is, in the case of a Kenneth Walker injury, I'm immediately going to have the dude inside my top 6 running back rankings that week. And then we're immediately going to have to tell 1,000 people on the live stream every single night that Zach Charbonnet is a must-start running back. If it wasn't for Kenneth Walker, realistically, Charbonnet would probably be up alongside Josh Jacobs in my rankings, but you have Walker there. Now, moving over to Travis Etienne, they do bring in Tootin, which we'll talk about in just 1 second. But it's a round 4 pick, completely new coaching staff. Clearly, this past coaching staff, this past front office, they hated Travis Etienne by the end of it. I mean, if you were looking at what Etienne did this past season, you had his snap rate fall from 74% down to 55%. Travis Etienne in 2023 finished with the 3rd most fantasy points among all running backs. And yet every single statistical category, you're going to see a massive fall off from Etienne from 2023 to 2024. The hope is maybe Etienne was just banged up last season. Maybe the offense was just worse because he had no Trevor Lawrence for a stretch of it. They don't make a significant investment of the running back position. Maybe Etienne's viable. He's probably not. Most likely, none of the running backs we're talking about at this point are viable. Like, the expected hit rate should be very low with all these guys. Like, Jaylen Warren probably has the receiving role. Like, you go back and you look at the past 2 years, Warren had 350 total routes run over the past 2 seasons. But I mean, even this, you've seen the Jaylen Warren juke rate fall from like 40% his rookie season, where he looked like a very efficient back, to as he's gotten more volume, that's fallen down to 22%. I don't even know if we can rank Jaylen Warren here. It's hard to talk yourself into any of these guys. Going and looking at Javonte Williams, the saving grace for Williams is this is another team. Everybody and their mom thought the Dallas Cowboys was going to take a running back of significance. They take Jaden Blue, who we're not going to talk about. He's right outside this top 43 rankings list. It looks like Javonte may be the starting running back day one in Dallas. He had 70 targets this past season. The juke rate's horrible here as well. 16%, 14%. It looks like Javonte's lost all juice since his injury in 2022, because previous to that, Javonte looked pretty damn good his rookie season. But again, Javonte's probably nothing here. Najee Harris is probably nothing as well. While he does get the $10 million contract, they took a running back in round 1. You take a running back in round 1 for him to be your starter. I'd expect that Najee Harris is like a worse version of Rachaad White last year, where you go back and you look at Rachaad White last season and you can say, oh, okay, well, I mean, he ended up as the running back 22. If Najee gives you that this year, then you'd be excited. But Rachaad White has more receiving chops than Najee Harris does. So Najee is going to like have that role at the beginning of the season where maybe you could start him if you were just the most desperate person ever. But really, it's just a premium handcuff back, where if you were to get an injury to Hampton, then at that point, he's probably an RB1. Cam Skattebo, I would expect that he would be my choice between the Giants running backs to come out of here alive. But again, he falls to round 4 of the NFL draft. The Giants are probably going to be a bad offense this next season. What I like about Skattebo is he has the size, and more importantly, he has the receiving skill set. So you go and you look at what he did at Arizona State. He had 605 receiving yards this past year. He averaged 46.5 receiving yards per game, which was second in this offense. Tootin, super athletic running back. Difficulty is if you look at the prospect page and we look at running backs that are RAS score over 9, but fewer than 30% of their career touches leading to first downs. And if they were selected between pick 75 and 135, not great running backs. Like you have Darrington Evans, Justice Hill. Like Isaac Grindo is maybe the best guy you're looking at on this list. Going over and looking at Ramondre Stevenson, reasonably, I don't see how you can start Ramondre Stevenson. We're not expecting him to have the receiving role in New England. I would expect that that's probably going in the direction of Henderson very early. I would almost say that like Ramondre is another version of Najee Harris, where if Najee Harris finds himself as a starter because Hampton gets injured, then maybe he's viable. Ramondre Stevenson's maybe viable if you get an injury to Henderson. Tyrone Tracy, I know that he had an whatever rookie season, but the fact of the matter is Tyrone Tracy was a 25-year-old rookie that was a day 3 NFL draft pick. The team has no allegiance to him. I think Skattebo is probably the guy. It's a bad offense. I don't think he's a particularly great running back either. Jordan Mason gets a decent little contract. Obviously, we saw Jordan Mason put up some top fantasy weeks where through the first month of the season, he was the RB5, the RB11, the RB24, and the RB5. He gave you those top usable weeks, but still at the same time, we are expecting Aaron Jones to be the starter. Outside of an injury, probably not startable. Tajee Spears, I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, okay, well, Spears is going to take over in Tennessee. Spears seems to be ahead on this list. The reality of the situation is Tajee Spears fell from 53% of the snaps as a rookie down to 43% of the snaps in year 2. Tajee Spears fell from 253 routes run as a rookie down to 124 in year 2. So I don't know if this is the trend of a running back that's taking over his backfield. Trey Benson maybe shows some signs of life, but I'd expect he's probably just a premium handcuff back. Not even a premium handcuff back. He's just a handcuff back. And then we can say the same thing with Rachaad White. Rachaad White was the RB22 this past season. But if you look at what he was over the past, say, 7 weeks of the year, 8 weeks of the year, he only had 2 games with 60+% of the snaps. I mean, early in the season, he was at 74%, 74%, 74%, 59%, 63%. We all saw Bucky Irving take over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers backfield. I think Rachaad White still probably has a role, but he's not going to be good enough to start in fantasy outside of a Bucky injury. But I am making these rankings right after the NFL draft. I'm going to keep on updating these rankings pretty much every single day over on flockfantasy.com. Obviously, we're going to be doing those underdog drafts every single night in the live stream. So again, I really hope I can see you out in those drafts with us. I really hope I can draft with you. If you want to check out the rankings, they're on the site. If you want to get in a draft with us, it will be Underdog Fantasy. I'll leave that link in the description, comment section. They're best ball drafts and no time commitment at all during the season. So I draft hundreds of teams every year. And again, if you want to get in on the action with me, you can find that link in the description, comment section. Code FLOCK will get you that deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you are actually going to be getting our 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Guide cheat sheet as well. But that's all I got for you. Really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with a live stream draft sometime soon.